Chapter 1. The Dawn of Camelot. The 1960s. It was a decade of profound transformation and radical shifts. The United States was emerging from the relative calm of the post-war 1950s into a period of dynamic change. The political landscape was not an exception. In Washington, D.C., the Capitol Dome was witness to these changes. Inside its grand walls, politicians grappled with significant challenges, from civil rights struggles to Cold War tensions, from the space race to the early stirrings of the Vietnam War. America was eager for a leader who could navigate these shifting waters with aplomb and vision. Enter John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a young senator from Massachusetts, whose charm and charisma contrasted sharply with the political figures of the time. Born into a prominent family, Kennedy was seen as a breath of fresh air, a beacon of hope that promised to carry the nation towards a brighter future. His youthful energy and vibrant outlook captivated the nation's imagination, and he was seen by many as the embodiment of the American dream. But his path to the presidency wasn't easy. The 1960 election was one of the most tightly contested races in United States history. Kennedy faced stiff competition from then Vice President Richard Nixon. The election highlighted a changing America, with television playing a crucial role in the campaign. The first ever televised debates were held, providing voters a new way to evaluate the candidates. Kennedy, with his charisma and confidence, shone in this new format. On the campaign trail, Kennedy championed the idea of a new frontier. He spoke of challenges not as burdens, but as opportunities for the country to prove its strength and spirit. His speeches were filled with optimism and challenge, urging Americans to do their part for the betterment of the nation. His message resonated with the electorate. In November 1960, after a nail-biting election night, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was declared the winner. The youngest elected president and the first Catholic to hold the office, John Fitzgerald Kennedy's win was a testament to a nation ready for change. Kennedy's inauguration in January 1961 was greeted with anticipation. The new president stood before the crowd, looking out onto the National Mall, and delivered his famous line, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." With these words, John Fitzgerald Kennedy didn't just accept the presidency, he beckoned an entire nation to join him on a journey toward a brighter future. This marked the beginning of a period known as Camelot, filled with hope and optimism, where a young leader and his equally young administration set out to make a difference in the world. This was the stage set for John Fitzgerald Kennedy's presidency. Little did anyone know that this period of brightness would have an abrupt and tragic end. But those stories are for the chapters to come. For now, we turn our attention to the dawn of Camelot, the early days of a presidency filled with promise and potential. Part 2. The Young President. John Fitzgerald Kennedy stepped into the White House on January 20, 1961, carrying the weight of enormous expectations. The country was looking for guidance, for a new direction, and at the helm was the youngest man ever elected to the office. He was just 43, a stark contrast to his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a war-hardened veteran, but Kennedy did not falter. He was ready to lead. He had a vision for America, an America that was not merely surviving, but thriving. He wanted an America that was a beacon of freedom, innovation, and hope. And to achieve this, he sought to push boundaries, to challenge the status quo, and to inspire the nation to greater heights. He dreamed of a new frontier, an era of exploration and achievement, both in outer space and on the home front. In his inaugural address, John Fitzgerald Kennedy laid out this vision. He spoke with vigor, conviction, and a determination that echoed throughout the nation. He emphasized the importance of civic duty, of each citizen's role in shaping the country's future. He spoke of a robust America, one that was not afraid to face its challenges head-on. One of Kennedy's first and most significant challenges was the Cold War. He stepped into the presidency at the height of the tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a geopolitical chess game of high stakes and intense rivalries. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's strategies and policies during this time, from his handling of the Berlin crisis to the Cuban Missile Crisis, revealed a leader willing to stand firm, but also one open to diplomacy and negotiation. Perhaps the most audacious goal of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's early presidency was his commitment to space exploration. In a bold and daring announcement in 1961, Kennedy pledged that America would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. This was not just about winning the space race against the Soviet Union. It was about pushing human potential to its limits. It was about exploring new frontiers, much like Kennedy's presidency itself. On the home front, John Fitzgerald Kennedy also had ambitious plans. He sought to invigorate the American economy, championed civil rights, and pushed for healthcare reform. He envisioned a country that was equitable, inclusive, and forward-thinking. His proposals often faced resistance in Congress, but John Fitzgerald Kennedy was not easily deterred. He believed in the power of dialogue and persuasion and was a shrewd and able politician. Despite the immense responsibilities, the young President Kennedy maintained an aura of grace and charisma. He was not just a leader but also a symbol of the era. His youthful energy, his engaging personality, and his visionary ideas embodied the optimism of the time. However, his presidency was not without its trials. Each triumph was hard-fought, each setback a lesson learned. But through it all, John Fitzgerald Kennedy remained committed to his vision for America. He remained the hopeful leader who asked his countrymen to dream more, do more, and become more. The days were indeed filled with promises, the dawn of a new era unfolding. However, the path ahead was laden with challenges and trials that would test the mettle of this young president, and ultimately of the entire nation. As the sun rose on the presidency of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, none could have predicted the profound turbulence and tragedy that lay ahead. Even as John Fitzgerald Kennedy began his presidency with grand ambitions and high hopes, the path ahead was far from smooth. In fact, barely 3 months into this term, he faced a crisis that would serve as a harsh awakening to the demands and intricacies of his new role: the Bay of Pigs invasion. The plan, conceived under the previous administration, aimed to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba through a covert operation involving Cuban exiles trained by the CIA. However, from the moment the operation was launched in April 1961, it quickly spiraled into disaster. The invasion force was captured, and the U.S. role in the affair was laid bare for the world to see. Kennedy took full responsibility for the failure, a move that earned him respect, but also marked a low point in his young presidency. But Kennedy was not a man to dwell on his failures. He quickly learned from the Bay of Pigs fiasco, adapting his approach to foreign policy and becoming more cautious in his decisions. This learning experience became vital just a year and a half later during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In October 1962, U.S. spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. mainland. The world held its breath as the Cold War suddenly turned hot, bringing humanity to the brink of nuclear war. But John Fitzgerald Kennedy, drawing from the lessons of the Bay of Pigs, navigated this crisis with a measured and balanced approach. He set up a naval blockade around Cuba, while opening back-channel communications with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. For 13 nerve-wracking days, the world watched, waited, and hoped. Then, a breakthrough came. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba and to dismantle missile sites in Turkey. With the crisis resolved, John Fitzgerald Kennedy emerged from it with his leadership qualities affirmed. His steady hand in the face of imminent danger had averted a nuclear catastrophe. On the domestic front, Kennedy faced other challenges. He wrestled with issues such as civil rights, poverty, and healthcare reform. His passion for civil rights was evident, and he took steps to ensure that all Americans were treated equally, regardless of their race or color. He proposed comprehensive civil rights legislation and introduced initiatives to tackle poverty and expand access to healthcare. Amidst these challenges were moments of triumph and joy. Perhaps none was more symbolic of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's vision for America than the establishment of the Peace Corps in 1961. This program, which sent American volunteers to developing countries to assist with education, health, and infrastructure projects, embodied John Fitzgerald Kennedy's belief in service and goodwill. The space race, too, offered moments of exhilaration. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's pledge to put a man on the moon galvanized the nation and boosted the spirits of the American people. It represented a pinnacle of human achievement and encapsulated Kennedy's optimism and forward-looking vision. As the first chapter of Kennedy's presidency unfolded, it became clear that this was a period of both challenges and triumphs. Each crisis was met with resilience, each triumph savored with humility. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the young president at the dawn of Camelot, proved that he was not only a charismatic leader but also a determined and capable statesman, steering his country with a steady hand through turbulent times. Yet, as his presidency progressed, darker clouds were gathering on the horizon, foreshadowing events that would shake the nation to its core. Chapter 2, November 22, 1963. November 22, 1963, began just like any other day for President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The morning sky in Fort Worth, Texas, was overcast, but the spirit in the Kennedy camp was as buoyant as ever. They were in Texas as part of a 2-day, 5-city tour meant to smooth tensions in the state's Democratic Party before the upcoming 1964 election. John Fitzgerald Kennedy woke early that day in Suite 850 at the Hotel Texas. Despite the drizzle, he was eager to meet the crowd of supporters who had gathered in the parking lot just outside the hotel. Dressed in a suit and standing on a makeshift stage, Kennedy addressed the crowd, applauding their spirit and joking about the weather. His charm was evident that morning, his charisma drawing cheers and applause from the rain-soaked crowd. After the parking lot speech, Kennedy headed back inside for a Chamber of Commerce breakfast in the hotel's grand ballroom. He was joined by his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, who was making a rare public appearance on the trip. Despite the early hour, the ballroom was buzzing with over 2,000 guests eager to hear from the president. Kennedy's speech at the breakfast was optimistic and focused on the future. He spoke about the strength of the American economy and the country's role in space exploration. His words echoed the vision he had outlined since the start of his presidency, a vision of progress, ambition, and unity. During the breakfast, John Fitzgerald Kennedy also took a moment to acknowledge his wife, who had just entered the room. 2 years ago, I introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris, he joked. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas. The crowd erupted in laughter, a warm moment on what would later turn into a day of tragedy. After the breakfast, Kennedy and his entourage prepared to leave for Dallas, the next stop on their tour. The motorcade was ready, and Air Force One was waiting at the Carswell Air Force Base. Despite the lingering drizzle, the president chose to use the open-top limousine, allowing for better interactions with the public. As John Fitzgerald Kennedy left the hotel, he didn't know that these were his final hours. The crowd cheered, and he waved, his smile reflecting the optimism and energy that had characterized his presidency. The morning in Fort Worth was filled with routine activities, but they were significant as they painted a picture of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's last day. It was a day that started with the promise of political progress and ended in a way that no one could have ever predicted. As they set off towards Dallas, the motorcade drove away under the gray skies, unknowingly heading towards a tragic twist of fate that would forever mark this day in history. Following a pleasant morning in Fort Worth, President Kennedy, his wife Jacqueline, and their entourage boarded Air Force One for the short flight to Dallas. The mood on board was light, and the skies had cleared up by the time they touched down at Love Field Airport shortly before noon. There they were greeted by a lively crowd of well-wishers, each eager to catch a glimpse of the charismatic president and his elegant wife. As Kennedy shook hands with the welcoming party and Jacqueline received a bouquet of red roses, there was no hint of the grim turn the day was about to take. The motorcade was assembled. A specially built, open-top limousine was the center of attention. Inside, the Kennedys were joined by Texas Governor John Connally and his wife, Nellie. Their destination was the Dallas Trade Mart, where the president was scheduled to deliver a luncheon speech. At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade turned onto Elm Street, slowly passing through Dealey Plaza, a park-like space in downtown Dallas. Thousands had gathered, lining the streets to wave and cheer as the president passed by. Kennedy, true to form, was waving back, his face breaking into that familiar, warm smile that had won over so many Americans. High above the crowd, in the sixth-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository building, a different scene was unfolding. There, nestled between stacks of textbooks, lay a sniper's nest. It was from this vantage point that Lee Harvey Oswald, an employee at the depository, was waiting. Back in the limousine, the atmosphere was joyful. John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his wife were enjoying the warm reception, and Governor Connally, turning to the president, said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." But before Kennedy could reply, shots rang out. The crowd's cheers were replaced by screams, and the joyful atmosphere turned to one of horror and confusion. In a matter of seconds, the scene of jubilation transformed into a scene of chaos and panic. Those in the motorcade were momentarily stunned, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Within the limousine, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, struck by the bullets, slumped over onto his wife, and the bright, sunny day in Dallas turned dark. The Dallas motorcade, once a scene of celebration and joy, had become a moment frozen in time, a moment that marked the abrupt end of the Camelot era. The initial reaction was of disbelief. The cheering crowd was now a mass of shocked faces. This couldn't be happening, not here. Not to John Fitzgerald Kennedy. But as the motorcade sped away towards Parkland Hospital, the grim reality started to sink in. The President of the United States had been shot. Dealey Plaza, with its open spaces, knolls, and patches of trees, was abuzz with energy on that fateful day. The crowd, consisting of locals and visitors alike, had gathered in anticipation, their faces alight with excitement to witness the passing of the presidential motorcade. As the clock struck 12:30 p.m., the open-top limousine carrying the Kennedys and the Connallys turned onto Elm Street. The atmosphere was electric, cheers echoing off the nearby buildings. Cameras flashed as the crowd tried to capture a lasting memento of this historic moment. However, unbeknownst to the joyful crowd, a grim tableau was being set in the Texas School Book Depository building overlooking the plaza. Behind the sixth-floor window, Lee Harvey Oswald had positioned himself with a vantage point that provided a clear view of the route the presidential motorcade would take. Down in the plaza, the cheers grew louder as the limousine approached, slowly rolling past the jubilant spectators. President Kennedy, ever the charismatic leader, was waving to the crowd, his wide smile reflecting the joy and excitement of the moment. Beside him, Jacqueline Kennedy, in her pink Chanel suit, was radiant, smiling and waving at the cheering crowd. And then it happened. The first shot echoed across Dealey Plaza, a harsh, chilling sound that pierced the air of celebration. A moment of confusion followed. People looked around, puzzled, as if trying to convince themselves that what they had heard was a car backfiring or a firecracker. The second shot rang out, and the reality of the situation started to sink in. People in the crowd began to scream and scatter, panic replacing the jubilation of a moment ago. In the limousine, Governor Connally jerked back in his seat, struck by a bullet. But the most heart-wrenching moment came with the third shot. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, still in his waving posture, was hit. His hands moved to his throat, and he slumped onto his wife, causing a collective gasp of horror to ripple through the crowd. A place that moments ago had been the scene of joy and celebration was now the epicenter of a national tragedy. The chaos and panic that ensued were palpable. People ran for cover, some shielding their children, others falling to the ground. Meanwhile, the presidential limousine sped away, leaving behind a Dealey Plaza that was forever scarred by those fatal moments. As the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in, a wave of shock and grief swept over the crowd. The disbelief was overwhelming. The President of the United States, beloved John Fitzgerald Kennedy, had been shot, turning an ordinary day in Dealey Plaza into a moment that would be remembered with sadness and horror for generations to come. Chapter 3. The world stands still. In the split second that it took for the third bullet to strike President Kennedy, the world seemed to stop. Then, chaos ensued. The presidential motorcade, which had been proceeding at a leisurely pace, suddenly lurched forward at high speed. Secret Service agents sprang into action, rushing to protect Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson in the car behind. Inside the limousine, the scene was one of shock and horror. Jacqueline Kennedy, in her now blood-stained pink suit, cradled her husband, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Governor Connolly, despite his own injuries, had the presence of mind to yell out, "They're going to kill us all." The motorcade raced towards Parkland Memorial Hospital, its sirens wailing, weaving through the shocked crowd that was just beginning to comprehend what had happened. Onlookers watched in stunned silence as the motorcade disappeared from sight, leaving behind a Dealey Plaza filled with confusion, fear, and a dawning sense of grief. Back at the Texas School Book Depository, employees were hurriedly evacuating the building, unaware that one of their own, Lee Harvey Oswald, had just altered the course of history. Oswald, slipping away amidst the commotion, made his way to his boarding house in Oak Cliff, a neighborhood in Dallas. News of the shooting spread like wildfire. Radio stations interrupted their programming to broadcast the horrifying news. The president has been shot. Television stations followed suit, their news anchors struggling to contain their own shock as they relayed the unthinkable to millions of viewers at home. Across the country and around the world, people gathered around their radios and televisions, hanging on to every word, praying for the president's survival. The air was thick with dread and uncertainty. Time seemed to stand still, as everyone waited for updates on the president's condition. At Parkland Memorial Hospital, a team of doctors was frantically working to save Kennedy's life, but despite their best efforts, it was too late. At 1:00 p.m., just half an hour after the shooting, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was pronounced dead. The young, vibrant leader who had charmed the nation with his charisma and vision was gone, leaving behind a country in shock and a world in mourning. The aftermath of the shooting was a whirlwind of confusion, grief, and fear. A sense of disbelief hung in the air. The unthinkable had happened. The leader of the free world had been assassinated in broad daylight, and the repercussions of this horrific event were just beginning to unfold. The world, indeed, stood still, mourning the loss of an icon and bracing itself for the uncertain days ahead. On November 22, 1963, at 1:38 p.m. Central Standard Time, a visibly emotional Walter Cronkite interrupted the regularly scheduled programming on CBS to deliver what would become one of the most iconic news broadcasts in history. The normally stoic Cronkite, known as the most trusted man in America, was visibly affected by the news he was about to relay to a nation and a world still grappling with shock and confusion. His voice wavered, his eyes moistened, and he removed his glasses, a simple gesture that somehow encapsulated the gravity of the moment. From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, Cronkite began shuffling through the wires coming in from the news ticker. President Kennedy died at 1:00 p.m. Central Standard Time. He paused, looking off camera, seeming to gather his composure. 2:00 Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. When he said these words, the enormity of the event struck the nation. People huddled around their television sets, gasping, crying, some falling to their knees. The image of Cronkite pausing to check his emotions before continuing the broadcast became emblematic of the national mood, a shared sense of grief and disbelief. Cronkite continued his broadcast, providing information about the assassination, the likely suspect, and the swearing-in of Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson as the new president. But it was that moment, the announcement of Kennedy's death, that would forever be seared into the memories of all who watched. Walter Cronkite's announcement on CBS News served as the heart-wrenching confirmation of the loss of President Kennedy. The news, delivered by the trusted Cronkite, was a moment of collective mourning for America. The nation, glued to their television screens, cried and grieved with Cronkite, a shared sorrow that transcended the boundaries of the television screen. This announcement was more than just a news report. It was a historical marker, a collective memory, and a moment that encapsulated the shock and grief of a nation. Walter Cronkite's broadcast on that tragic day stands as an enduring symbol of a nation's shared pain, a moment when America and the world truly stood still. As the news of President Kennedy's assassination traveled beyond the borders of the United States, a wave of shock and grief spread around the world. From small villages to bustling cities, people across the globe found themselves united in a shared sense of loss and disbelief. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a charismatic leader who had captured the world's imagination with his vision and charm, was gone. In England, Queen Elizabeth II ordered a period of mourning, a gesture of solidarity and respect usually reserved for heads of state. Prime Minister Sir Alec Douglas-Home described the news as a monstrous act, reflecting the dismay felt by many in Britain. Across the Channel in France, President Charles de Gaulle, who himself had survived multiple assassination attempts, spoke of Kennedy as a man who incarnated an exalted idea of the human adventure, underlining the French people's deep sense of sadness and loss. In Germany, where Kennedy had recently delivered his iconic Ich bin ein Berliner speech, Chancellor Ludwig Erhard declared a month of mourning. The loss was deeply felt in Berlin, where Kennedy was seen as a beacon of hope amidst the city's political struggles. In the Soviet Union, despite the Cold War tensions between the two nations, ordinary citizens expressed shock and grief. Newspapers bore headlines of the tragic event, and a somber Nikita Khrushchev offered his condolences, noting the magnitude of the tragedy. The reactions in Asia, Africa, and Latin America were no different. In India, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru expressed his profound sorrow, while Japan's Prime Minister Hayato Akita sent a heartfelt condolence message. In Africa, mourning activities were organized in several countries, including Ghana and Nigeria. Latin America also saw widespread expressions of grief, with many remembering Kennedy's vision for the Alliance for Progress. The shock and grief weren't just limited to political leaders and the public. Famous personalities from the fields of arts, sports, and literature expressed their sorrow too. Iconic figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Pablo Picasso, and Arthur Miller shared their heartfelt condolences, capturing the collective mourning of the global community. The worldwide response to Kennedy's death was a testament to his global stature and appeal. His vision of a more peaceful and cooperative world, his charisma, and his youthful energy had resonated with people everywhere. His death left a void not just in the United States, but in hearts around the world. The global reactions served as a poignant reminder of how deeply interconnected our world had become, and how the loss of a leader could reverberate across continents, uniting people in shared grief and disbelief. Chapter 4. The Investigation. In the aftermath of President Kennedy's assassination, questions swirled around the circumstances of his death. Who was behind it? Was it a lone gunman or an elaborate conspiracy? To answer these questions and put the nation's doubts to rest, then Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had assumed the presidency, established the Warren Commission, named after its chairman, Chief Justice Earl Warren. The Warren Commission was a 7-member panel tasked with investigating the assassination. The other members were prominent figures, including Senator Richard Russell Jr., Senator John Sherman Cooper, Representative Hale Boggs, Representative Gerald Ford, Alan W. Dulles, former director of the CIA, and John J. McCloy, a respected attorney and former president of the World Bank. The commission set to work, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, analyzing countless pieces of evidence, and scrutinizing Zapruder's film footage of the assassination, which provided a crucial visual record of the event. It was an arduous process, but after 10 months, the commission released its final report in September 1964. According to the Warren Commission, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy. The report concluded that Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, where he was working at the time. One of these shots, the report claimed, was the fatal headshot that killed Kennedy. The commission also concluded that Oswald killed Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit approximately 45 minutes after assassinating Kennedy, before being arrested at a local movie theater. 2 days later, while in police custody, Oswald was shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. The Warren Commission's report sought to close the book on the Kennedy assassination, offering a detailed account based on the evidence and testimonies it had gathered. It provided the American public with an official narrative. A lone gunman, without any evident motive, had changed the course of history. However, despite the Commission's thorough investigation and clear conclusions, doubts lingered. Critics questioned the report's findings, wondering if Oswald truly acted alone, or if he was part of a larger conspiracy. While the Warren Commission's report remains the official narrative, these questions and doubts have kept the discussion around President Kennedy's assassination alive, making it one of the most examined and debated events in American history. Born in New Orleans in 1939, Lee Harvey Oswald's early life was marked by instability and hardship. Raised without a father and with a mother unable to provide consistent care, Oswald spent some of his youth in orphanages and foster homes. He was described as a quiet, somewhat introverted child with few friends. After a stint in the Marine Corps, during which he displayed an aptitude for marksmanship, Oswald developed an interest in socialist ideology, leading him to defect to the Soviet Union in 1959. However, his life in the Soviet Union was far from ideal, and after becoming disillusioned, he returned to the United States in 1962 with his Russian wife and infant daughter. Living in Dallas, Texas, Oswald held a series of low-paying jobs, struggling to support his family. In 1963, he secured a position at the Texas School Book Depository, a job that would, in retrospect, appear ominously convenient given the events that were to transpire. On the morning of November 22, 1963, Oswald left his house, leaving behind a wedding ring and a significant sum of money. He was carrying a long, paper-wrapped package that he claimed contained curtain rods. The Warren Commission, however, concluded that this package contained the disassembled Mannlicher Carcano rifle that would be used to assassinate President Kennedy. The Warren Commission found that Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th-floor window of the depository as Kennedy's motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza. After the shooting, Oswald left the building and traveled by bus and taxi to his rooming house. He then headed on foot towards the Texas Theater, where he was eventually apprehended by the police. 2 days after the assassination, as Oswald was being transferred to the county jail, he was fatally shot by Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner. Oswald's death, broadcast live on television, added another layer of mystery and intrigue to the narrative. With Oswald's death, many questions about his motives, potential accomplices, and the exact sequence of events remained unanswered, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories that continue to swirl around the assassination of President Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald, a figure shrouded in controversy, remains at the center of one of the most profound mysteries in American history. His life, actions, and his shocking death, just days after Kennedy's assassination, continue to fascinate and perplex researchers, historians, and the general public alike. While the Warren Commission's report stands as the official narrative of President Kennedy's assassination, it was not without its critics. From the outset, the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating Kennedy met with skepticism from some sections of the public, leading to an array of conspiracy theories and doubts that have persisted over the years. One of the primary criticisms focused on the single bullet theory, also known as the magic bullet theory. The commission concluded that a single bullet, fired by Oswald, struck both Kennedy and Governor John Connally, who was seated in front of Kennedy in the motorcade. Critics argued that the bullet's trajectory was too implausible, and that the bullet was found in almost pristine condition, leading to questions about the validity of this theory. The Zapruder film, a key piece of evidence for the commission, also raised doubts. Some critics believed that the film suggested a shot from the front, contrary to the commission's conclusion of shots from the rear. Also, the backward motion of Kennedy's head after the fatal shot led some to speculate about the possibility of a second shooter located on the infamous grassy knoll. Another area of concern was the handling of forensic evidence. Autopsy photos and X-rays of Kennedy's body were not presented to the Warren Commission during their investigation. Critics argued that this hampered a comprehensive understanding of Kennedy's wounds and the direction of the shots. Then there was the mysterious death of Oswald himself, shot by Jack Ruby before he could be tried. This fueled theories about a potential cover-up, with skeptics suggesting that Oswald was silenced to prevent him from revealing a larger conspiracy. Moreover, some critics pointed out the hasty conclusion of the commission, suggesting that it was under immense public pressure to provide answers, which may have led to an oversimplification of a complex case. The existence of these discrepancies and doubts points to a larger truth about the Kennedy assassination. While we have an official narrative, many questions remain unanswered. The event has, over time, become a mosaic of fact, speculation, and mystery that continues to captivate the public's imagination. As we sift through the layers of evidence, theories, and criticisms, we come to understand that the story of President Kennedy's assassination is a complex tapestry of truth and doubt, clarity, and ambiguity. Chapter 5. The Conspiracy Theories. The assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy is one of the most examined events in history, giving rise to a myriad of theories that seek to explain what happened on that fateful day in Dealey Plaza. Perhaps the most famous among these theories is the one involving the so-called grassy knoll. The term grassy knoll refers to a small, sloping patch of grass located on the north side of Dealey Plaza, Dallas, where President Kennedy's motorcade was passing when he was shot. According to the official account provided by the Warren Commission, Lee Harvey Oswald fired the fatal shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, located behind the motorcade. However, some witnesses and critics of the official narrative claimed that they heard or saw smoke or a flash of light from the direction of the grassy knoll around the time Kennedy was shot, suggesting the presence of a second shooter. This theory was bolstered by the Zapruder film, which showed President Kennedy's head moving backwards after the final shot, leading some to conclude that the shot had come from the front, from the grassy knoll, rather than the rear. Subsequent acoustic analysis of recordings from Dealey Plaza initially seemed to support the theory of a second shooter on the grassy knoll. However, later reviews of this analysis have raised doubts about its conclusions, with many experts arguing that the sounds identified as gunshots could be echoes or noise from other sources. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the grassy knoll theory has become deeply embedded in the public consciousness, and is often portrayed in films, books, and documentaries about the assassination. Over the years, many possible identities for the supposed second shooter have been proposed, ranging from mafia hitmen and rogue elements within the United States government to foreign agents. In truth, while the grassy knoll theory remains popular, it is far from proven. Like all theories about the John Fitzgerald Kennedy assassination that deviate from the official account, it rests on a combination of eyewitness testimony, interpretation of available evidence, and a certain degree of speculation. As such, while it provides a compelling narrative that challenges the conclusion of the Warren Commission, it should be approached with a critical eye. However, the persistent fascination with the grassy knoll theory and other alternative narratives underlines a broader issue: the enduring skepticism about the official account of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination, and a continuing desire to seek out the truth, however elusive it may prove to be. In the swirling sea of theories that surround the John Fitzgerald Kennedy assassination, one persistent idea is the alleged involvement of organized crime. The Mafia, as it is commonly known, was at the height of its power in the 1960s, and some believe that its leaders had a motive for wanting Kennedy out of the picture. The connection between the Kennedy family and the Mafia goes back to John Fitzgerald Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy. It was widely rumored that Joseph Kennedy, a wealthy and ambitious man, had connections with the mob. These connections, some claim, were used to secure votes for John Fitzgerald Kennedy during the 1960 presidential election. However, once in office, President Kennedy and his brother Robert, who was Attorney General, initiated an aggressive crackdown on organized crime. Robert Kennedy, in particular, was relentless in his pursuit of notorious mob bosses like Sam Giancana and Jimmy Hoffa. This about-face from the Kennedys could have given the mafia a motive for retaliation. The theory suggests that the mafia could have orchestrated the assassination, using Lee Harvey Oswald and perhaps others as their pawns. Some theorists even claim that Jack Ruby, the man who killed Oswald, had links to organized crime, which in their view adds another layer of plausibility to the theory. This theory gained further traction with the release of the movie John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1991, which suggested a conspiracy behind the assassination and hinted at mafia involvement. Also, over the years, a few individuals connected to the mob have claimed knowledge of the mafia's involvement in the assassination, further fueling speculation. However, despite its persistence and popularity, the mafia theory suffers from a lack of concrete evidence. While it's clear that the Kennedys were at odds with the mafia, no definitive proof has been presented to show that the mob was involved in the assassination. The alleged connections between Oswald and Ruby to the mafia are tenuous at best, and most of the claims about mafia involvement are based on hearsay and conjecture. Still, the mafia theory continues to hold sway over the public imagination. The tantalizing idea of a high-level conspiracy involving organized crime adds a layer of intrigue to the already enigmatic assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It reminds us yet again that the truth behind that tragic day in Dallas continues to be a complex and elusive puzzle. The theory of a government cover-up in President John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination is another compelling narrative that has gained significant attention over the years. It suggests that elements within the United States government either orchestrated or were complicit in the assassination and subsequent investigation. Several factors contribute to the strength and persistence of this theory. For starters, it is rooted in the profound shock and disbelief that followed John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination. Many people struggled to accept that a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, could bring down the President of the United States. For some, it seemed more plausible that a larger, more powerful entity was involved. The theory of a government cover-up often points to perceived inconsistencies and omissions in the Warren Commission's investigation. Critics argue that the commission was hasty in its conclusion that Oswald acted alone, and that it failed to examine other potential leads and scenarios. Some proponents of this theory believe that elements within the CIA were behind the assassination. John Fitzgerald Kennedy had a contentious relationship with the agency, particularly after the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was a disastrous attempt to overthrow Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Others suggest that the military-industrial complex might have played a role, given Kennedy's reluctance to escalate military involvement in Vietnam. Another variant of the government cover-up theory suggests that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson had a role in the assassination, with the motive of ascending to the presidency. This theory is often supported by references to Johnson's alleged personal and political clashes with John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. Yet despite these tantalizing narratives, concrete evidence linking the government to the assassination or a cover-up remains elusive. While there were undoubtedly tensions within John Fitzgerald Kennedy's administration and the broader political landscape, these do not necessarily equate to a conspiracy to assassinate the president. The government cover-up theory, like all conspiracy theories surrounding John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination, reflects a deep-seated mistrust and suspicion of powerful institutions. While it may seem more exciting or satisfying to believe in a grand conspiracy, it's crucial to remember that such theories must be held up to rigorous scrutiny and should not be accepted without compelling, verifiable evidence. Still, the persistence of these theories underscores the lingering doubts and questions surrounding John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination that continue to fascinate us more than half a century later. Chapter 6: Kennedy's Legacy. The assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy did more than take the life of a charismatic leader. It marked a profound shift in American culture and society, leaving an indelible imprint that remains visible even today. In the immediate aftermath of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death, a sense of national shock and grief swept across the country. This collective mourning was amplified by the new dominance of television as a media form. For the first time in history, people from coast to coast watched the same tragic events unfold in real time, creating a shared experience of loss. Kennedy's death symbolized the end of a period of optimism and idealism, often referred to as Camelot, a reference to the mythical court of King Arthur, filled with hope and promise. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a youthful, energetic leader with a forward-looking vision. His assassination shattered that image, marking a turning point towards a more turbulent and cynical era in the American psyche. In the years that followed, the cultural impact of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death could be seen in a variety of forms. In literature and film, the assassination has been a recurring theme. Books like 11/20 Seconds/63 by Stephen King and films like Oliver Stone's John Fitzgerald Kennedy show how deeply embedded the event is in our cultural consciousness. The conspiracy theories surrounding John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death have become a cultural phenomenon in themselves, reflecting a deep-seated mistrust of official narratives and authority. The influence of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination extended to the political sphere as well. The tragedy led to calls for reforms in gun laws, presidential security, and the handling of criminal trials, among other things. It also fostered a climate of fear and suspicion that fed into the divisive politics of the 1960s and beyond. But despite the trauma, Kennedy's legacy continues to inspire. His calls for civil rights, peace, and space exploration remain relevant today. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's charisma, eloquence, and vision for a better America are frequently invoked by politicians and activists alike, indicating how enduring his influence has been on American society. In essence, the cultural impact of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death is a complex tapestry of grief, change, and inspiration. It stands as a testament to the power of a single event to alter the course of a nation's history and shape its collective memory. The term Camelot is often used to describe the presidency of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It was a term that came into use after his death, introduced by his widow Jacqueline Kennedy, who likened their time in the White House to the idyllic, hopeful court of King Arthur as depicted in the popular Broadway musical Camelot. The metaphor of Camelot captures the spirit of optimism, youth, and progress that defined the Kennedy era. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the youngest elected president in U.S. history, a World War II hero with an attractive family, and a compelling vision for the future of the country. He brought a sense of glamour and dynamism to the presidency that was in stark contrast to the more conservative and traditional administrations of the past. His tenure was filled with promise and the hope of great things to come. Kennedy's assassination, therefore, was seen not just as the death of a president, but the end of Camelot. It represented a loss of innocence and optimism, a shattering of the American dream. This idea of the end of Camelot has become a powerful symbol, representing a turning point in American history. In the aftermath of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death, America underwent significant social and political changes. The civil rights movement gained momentum, leading to monumental changes in society. The Vietnam War escalated, causing deep divisions and political unrest. The sense of promise and optimism that defined the early 1960s gave way to a more complicated and uncertain era. But the memory of Camelot, however brief it was, continues to resonate. It represents a time when America seemed to stand on the brink of a bright new era, a time of hope, promise, and unlimited potential. It has since become a standard to which subsequent presidencies are often compared. The end of Camelot thus has a dual significance. On one hand, it signifies a loss of innocence and a descent into a more complex and challenging era. On the other hand, it serves as a reminder of the ideals that John Fitzgerald Kennedy embodied: progress, optimism, and the belief in the ability to effect change, values that continue to inspire and guide even in the face of adversity. More than half a century after his death, John Fitzgerald Kennedy remains an influential figure in modern memory. His charismatic leadership, powerful speeches, and the tragic circumstances of his death have been etched into the collective consciousness, influencing perceptions of American history and shaping contemporary dialogues. In the public's mind, John Fitzgerald Kennedy often symbolizes a time of optimism and progress. His calls for civil rights, peace, and space exploration are still echoed today. His famous inaugural address quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," continues to inspire public service and civic duty. Kennedy's youthful energy and the tragic circumstances of his death have also turned him into a sort of mythical figure. The Camelot era, though short-lived, continues to evoke nostalgia for a time of hope and progress. This romanticized image of John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his presidency often glosses over the complexities and controversies of his time in office, including his administration's involvement in the Vietnam War and the Bay of Pigs invasion. The assassination itself, and the events surrounding it, have become part of the fabric of American history. The images of the Dallas motorcade, the chaos that ensued, and the swearing-in of Lyndon B. Johnson are ingrained in the nation's memory. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death marked a seismic shift in American society, acting as a catalyst for many of the social and political changes that defined the latter half of the 20th century. The conspiracy theories surrounding John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death have also had a lasting impact on modern memory. These theories have fueled a culture of skepticism towards official narratives and have had a profound influence on popular culture, with countless books, movies, and documentaries exploring various aspects of the assassination. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's memory has also had a practical impact on presidential security protocols. His assassination prompted a significant overhaul of protective measures for the president, changing the way the Secret Service operates. Today, John Fitzgerald Kennedy is remembered not just as a president, but as a symbol of an era. He embodies a time of transformation, hope, and tragedy. He stands as a testament to the potential of leadership, but also the complexities of power. Even as new generations come of age, the memory of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, his presidency, and his untimely death continue to captivate and inspire, ensuring his enduring presence in American history and culture. Hey everyone, it's Sarah Aud from Woo English here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Your likes really do support this channel and help it to grow. If you have any thoughts or questions about what we discussed today, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. See you in the next video. Bye bye.